I call the member for Ninderry.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I also rise to contribute to the Justice and Other Legislation COVID-19 Emergency Response Amendment Bill. This bill amends over 20 different acts, including the Body Corporate and Community Management Act, the Public Health Act, the Police Powers and Responsibilities Act, the Youth Justices Act and the Corrective Services Act. Broadly, the proposed amendments address a number of issues in response to the COVID-19 emergency, and there are a range of sensible measures in this bill which will help ease the pain and aid the recovery from COVID-19. In relation to the Police Powers and Responsibilities Act, the bill amends the PPRA to allow a magistrate or children's court to issue an order for a COVID-19 test from a relevant person. This is a positive and necessary amendment that will help protect the health, safety and welfare of our frontline police officers. Police come in close contact with offenders on a daily basis, potentially exposing themselves to the risk of contracting COVID-19. This amendment will give police the ability to request a test order, thereby identifying whether or not there is any risk of infection, giving them the ability to take the necessary precautions. Moving to the amendments in the Corrective Services Act, Mr Speaker, the most sensible thing the government has done in this bill is follow the advice of the LNP. Before this bill made its way to the floor of Parliament, this government was forced to backflip on what it thought was an urgent priority, to give prisoners an early release from jail. This government is renowned for being soft on crime. Queenslanders know it and our police know it. But this was spectacular even by their standards, trying to use COVID-19 as an excuse to give criminals their freedom before they had served their time. Let's just go through the chronology of the life of this amendment and what has happened over the last couple of days. On Monday, the Premier and her Cabinet approved the urgent introduction of an amendment to the Corrective Services Act which would see prisoners get an early mark from jail. On Tuesday, in an attempt to sell the unsellable, we were told this government thought prisoners deserved to be released from jail early so they don't miss their flight home. Later on Tuesday at 7 p.m, after receiving an inquiry from the Courier Mail, the Police Minister defended this position. At 8 p.m, only 60 minutes after this defence, the Minister had backed down and criminals would no longer be released early. What happened between 7 and 8 p.m. to change the Minister's position? Well, news had gotten out that the Minister was opening up the community chest and giving out get-out-of-jail-free cards. Well, this isn't a game of Monopoly. This is the Parliament of Queensland, and the fact this government even thought they could get away with that beggars belief. We are dealing with important legislation here, and this government treats it like a dinner reservation. Provisions in at 7 p.m. and out by 8. One thing the Labor government and this minister do have a monopoly on is being weak on crime. The only redeeming feature of this whole episode is they have started listening to the LNP. And if they continue to do that, maybe they are half a chance of keeping Queenslanders safe. Look at the article in the Courier Mail yesterday. The opposition leader is quoted in there saying in the afternoon, "If you do the crime, you must do the time." And then the police minister is later quoted in the same article saying exactly the same thing. Well, I know which party was saying it first, and I know which party has been saying it for the last 5 years. I don't mind the minister copying our homework. In the end, it is for the best. But if the government was doing their job, they wouldn't have to copy our work. They would be tough on crime, and they would be putting the community ahead of criminals. For the time being, I am happy for the minister to call us up and just ask for the answers rather than sneakily copy our work. It will save a lot of time, effort and embarrassment. But this is just another example of the Palaszczuk government having the wrong priorities. There is nothing in this bill to protect the victims of domestic and family violence. There is nothing in this bill to further protect children from pedophiles online, and there is nothing in this bill to protect Queenslanders from the youth crime epidemic currently gripping our communities. In fact, such was the urgency of this debate to debate this bill, this government has in its haste failed to address those same critical health and safety measures it had previously promised to deliver and which one could reasonably expect would be addressed in such urgent legislation. It is bitterly disappointing that this emergency legislation makes no reference to the increasing threat of domestic violence in our communities. During this COVID-19 crisis, recent Google data has shown a 75% increase in the average number of searches seeking advice and support from family and domestic violence. Earlier this month, the new Deputy Premier and Minister for Health said anything we can do to address the increase in domestic and family violence during COVID is important. Even the Minister for Prevention of Family Violence acknowledged service providers had reported a dramatic increase in the brutality and severity of attacks on women and children, and yet nowhere in this emergency legislation are there any measures to help protect the highly vulnerable victims and potential victims of domestic violence. What has been clearly laid out in the chamber over the past few days is the contrast between the priorities of this Labor government and that of a Deb Freckleton-led LNP. As Labor were trying to slip through urgent amendments to give criminals an early release from prison, our leader, the member for Nanango, was preparing to table amendments to the Criminal Code to better protect victims of DV from strangulation. Similarly, when it comes to the urgent amendments in the Youth Justice Act in this bill to allow for a short period of contract labour in youth detention facilities, the government should have been moving urgent amendments to repeal their current catch-and-release laws. Laws which have sparked a juvenile crime epidemic that has seen communities across our state held to ransom by the actions of recidivist young criminals. Queenslanders rightly would have expected this emergency legislation to address these weak laws which see young offenders back out on the street before our hard-working police have had time to file the paperwork. Our police and all Queenslanders have had enough. As communities across the state, including Townsville, the Gold Coast and areas of Brisbane, suffer from this ongoing crime epidemic, this soft-on-crime Labor government has betrayed them yet again. But this is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to examining this legislation, which, according to the government, is so urgent and important to the health and safety and financial well-being of Queenslanders that it needs to bypass the usual checks and balances of the committee process. Instead of amendments to stop the revolving door justice system, the Palaszczuk Labor government think it more important to amend the Youth Justice Act in regard to industrial relations. This government's priority should be to reduce crime, helping the community not feel like prisoners in their own home. Instead, they are more interested in getting prisoners back out into our communities. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is these lessons that this government has failed to learn that will continue to plague their incompetent administration. These are the hallmarks of a debt, integrity and scandal-ridden Labor government that has no plan, no budget and no leadership. When we make it to the other side of COVID-19, Queenslanders won't be celebrating the swift pace of an economic recovery. They will be mourning the loss of jobs that will leave a generational scar to be borne by our children and grandchildren. They will mourn a once vibrant tourism industry, a $300 billion industry that once supported 1 in 5 jobs in this state, but which was left to wither because of a Premier's misplaced priorities. The highest priority of any government should be the safety and security of its citizens and to provide an economic environment in which its citizens can thrive. It is now crystal clear that it is only an LNP government who will provide safer communities for all Queenslanders and their families. Only an LNP government will rebalance the scales of justice in favour of victims and community safety, and only an LNP government who can provide a long-term economic plan and a roadmap to economic recovery. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Thank you.